Ladies and gentlemen, today we dive into a fascinating yet complex topic: how Italy became the most divided country in Europe. Italy, known for its rich history, breathtaking landscapes, and delicious cuisine, also carries a legacy of deep divisions. These divisions, political, economic, cultural, and regional, have shaped the nation's modern identity. Italy's divisions date back centuries, long before the modern nation-state was formed. Unlike countries such as France or England, which consolidated into unified states in the medieval period, Italy remained fragmented for most of its history. The Italian peninsula was home to a patchwork of independent kingdoms, republics, duchies, and city-states, each with its own rulers, laws, and economic structures. These regions often fought against each other, forming alliances with foreign powers to maintain their independence. During the Roman Empire, Italy was the center of power, but after the empire collapsed in the 5th century, the peninsula became a battleground for external invaders, including the Byzantines, Lombards, Normans, and later the Spanish, French, and Austrians. The absence of a centralized authority allowed regional identities to develop strongly, with each area maintaining distinct traditions, dialects, and political systems. Cities like Venice, Florence, and Genoa became powerful maritime republics, controlling trade routes and amassing wealth independently from the rest of Italy. Meanwhile, the Papal States, under the direct rule of the Pope, dominated central Italy, creating a theocratic government that often clashed with secular rulers. In the 19th century, the movement for Italian unification, known as the Risorgimento, sought to bring these diverse regions together under a single nation. Figures like Giuseppe Garibaldi, Count Cavour, and Giuseppe Mazzini played key roles in the struggle for unification, which was achieved in 1861. However, this unification was largely political rather than cultural or economic. Many Italians still identified more with their local regions than with the new Italian state, and the southern part of the country, known as the Mezzogiorno, remained economically and socially distant from the wealthier north. The artificial nature of Italian unification also meant that some regions were forcibly annexed rather than willingly joining the new state. This led to deep resentment, especially in the south, where revolts and banditry erupted in response to the harsh policies of the new government. The Piedmontese rulers, who led the unification process, imposed their laws and systems on the entire country without fully considering the differences in culture and governance that had existed for centuries. This top-down approach left many Italians feeling alienated from the central government, further reinforcing local loyalties over national identity. Even after unification, the Italian state struggled to integrate its diverse populations. The education system, for example, was designed to promote the Italian language, but many Italians continued to speak regional dialects, making national communication difficult. Infrastructure, such as roads and railways, was more developed in the north, leaving the south isolated and economically disadvantaged. The lack of true national unity led to weak governance, corruption, and inefficiency, issues that persist in modern Italy. The effects of this historical disunity are still visible today. Regional rivalries remain strong, with some areas, such as Lombardy and Veneto, advocating for greater autonomy or even independence. Italy's political system is often gridlocked by competing regional interests, making it difficult to implement nationwide reforms. The country's historical divisions have shaped its modern challenges, making Italy one of the most politically and economically divided nations in Europe. One of the most persistent and defining divisions in Italy is the stark economic contrast between the industrialized north and the underdeveloped south. This divide, known as the Question Meridionale, Southern Question, has existed since the country's unification in 1861 and continues to shape Italy's political, social, and economic landscape today. Historical roots of the divide. Before unification, Italy was composed of various independent states with vastly different economies. The northern regions, particularly those under Austrian influence, had already begun industrializing in the early 19th century. Cities like Milan, Turin, and Genoa developed strong manufacturing sectors, banking institutions, and trade networks, benefiting from proximity to European markets and infrastructure investment. The region's geographical advantages, including navigable rivers and fertile plains, further contributed to economic growth. In contrast, the South was largely agrarian, with a feudal system that concentrated wealth and land in the hands of a small elite. The Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which ruled much of the South, had a weak industrial base and a largely uneducated population. Landowners controlled vast estates, and the majority of people worked as poor tenant farmers or laborers. The lack of industrialization meant that when Italy unified, the South was already decades behind the North economically. The new Italian government, dominated by leaders from the North, implemented policies that favored the industrialized regions, such as high tariffs to protect northern industries while ignoring the agricultural struggles of the South. Heavy taxation was imposed on southern farmers, deepening economic hardship. Many Southerners, who initially had hope for unification, soon realized they were being treated as second-class citizens in the new Italy. This led to widespread resentment and even violent revolts against the government. Migration and the brain drain. Due to the lack of economic opportunities, millions of Southern Italians emigrated in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, primarily to the United States, Argentina, and Brazil. This mass migration, while relieving some population pressure, also drained the South of its workforce and potential talent. Even in the modern era, educated young people from the South often move to the North or leave Italy altogether in search of better job prospects, further weakening the Southern economy. During the economic boom of the 1950s and 1960s, the Italian government attempted to reduce the gap by investing in Southern infrastructure and industry through the Cassa per il Mezzogiorno, a state-funded program. While some improvements were made, much of the funding was lost to corruption, inefficiency, and organized crime. The Mafia and other criminal organizations gained significant control over economic activities in the South, discouraging legitimate businesses and foreign investment. Modern-day economic disparities. Today, the North continues to dominate Italy's economy, contributing the majority of the country's GDP. Cities like Milan and Turin are global financial and industrial hubs, home to major companies such as Fiat, Pirelli, and Luxottica. Northern Italy also has a strong export-oriented economy, producing machinery, automobiles, textiles, and fashion products that are in high demand worldwide. Unemployment rates in the North are relatively low, and the standard of living is comparable to that of Germany or France. The South, however, remains plagued by economic stagnation. Unemployment rates are significantly higher, especially among young people, often exceeding 30 to 40% in some areas. Many southern towns and villages suffer from depopulation as residents leave in search of work elsewhere. The public sector is often the largest employer as private sector investment remains weak. Corruption, organized crime, and bureaucratic inefficiency continue to discourage business growth. Infrastructure is another major issue. While the North has a modern transportation network, including high-speed rail and well-maintained highways, the South lags behind, with outdated roads, poor public transport, and insufficient investment in connectivity. This makes it harder for businesses in the South to compete on a national and global level. Despite decades of government programs aimed at reducing the gap, the North-South divide remains one of Italy's most pressing issues. It fuels political tensions, with many in the North feeling they are subsidizing the poorer South through taxes, while Southerners argue that they have been neglected and exploited by the central government. This economic imbalance affects Italy's overall stability, making it difficult for the country to implement nationwide reforms or achieve consistent economic growth. The divide is not just a financial issue, it is a cultural and political one that influences voting patterns, governance, and even Italy's relationship with the European Union. Italy has long been known for its political instability, a characteristic that has plagued the country since its unification in 1861. This instability stems from a combination of historical fragmentation, frequent government changes, deep ideological divisions, and systemic corruption. The result is a political landscape that is often chaotic, with short-lived governments, fragile coalitions, and a lack of long-term policy planning. Frequent government changes. One of the most striking features of Italy's political system is the sheer number of governments the country has had since World War II. Since 1946, Italy has seen over 60 different governments, meaning that on average, a new government is formed every 1.3 years. This constant turnover makes it extremely difficult to implement long-term economic and social reforms, as each new administration tends to undo or modify the policies of its predecessor. The frequent collapses of governments are often due to Italy's proportional representation electoral system, which leads to fragmented parliaments and coalition governments. Because no single party can usually secure a majority, alliances between multiple parties are necessary to form a government. These coalitions are often unstable, with ideological differences leading to internal conflicts and eventual breakdowns. Political parties frequently shift allegiances, and leaders are often forced to negotiate fragile agreements to stay in power. For example, Italy has seen prime ministers come and go in rapid succession, with figures like Silvio Berlusconi, Matteo Renzi, and Mario Draghi each serving brief and tumultuous terms. This instability creates uncertainty, both within Italy and among international investors, weakening confidence in the country's governance. Deep ideological divisions. Italy's political instability is further exacerbated by strong ideological divisions. The country has long been split between the political left and right, with deeply entrenched rivalries between socialist, communist, liberal, and conservative factions. During the Cold War, Italy had one of the largest communist parties in Western Europe, the Italian Communist Party, PCI, which was in constant opposition to the ruling center-right Christian Democrats. The ideological battle between these factions often led to violent political unrest, including terrorist attacks from both far-left and far-right groups in the 1970s, a period known as the Years of Lead. Even today, political polarization remains a major issue. The rise of populist parties like the Five Star Movement, M5S, and Lega Nord reflects growing dissatisfaction with traditional parties. These movements often clash with mainstream political forces, making it difficult to form stable governments or implement policies that require broad consensus. Corruption and the influence of organized crime. Corruption has been a persistent problem in Italian politics, contributing to instability and public distrust in the government. Italy has one of the highest corruption rates among Western European countries, with scandals frequently emerging at all levels of government. One of the most infamous corruption investigations in Italian history was the Populist, Clean Hands, operation in the early 1990s. This nationwide crackdown exposed widespread bribery and illegal dealings involving major political figures, business leaders, and organized crime. The scandal led to the collapse of Italy's two main post-war political parties, the Christian Democrats and the Socialist Party, and ushered in a new era of political fragmentation. Despite this, corruption remains a major issue today. Political leaders continue to face accusations of bribery, misuse of public funds, and ties to criminal organizations. The Mafia, particularly in the South, exerts significant influence over local and national politics, often rigging elections, intimidating officials, and diverting public funds into illegal enterprises. This corruption undermines the credibility of institutions and fuels public disillusionment with the political system. Weak governance and policy inconsistency. Due to frequent government changes and political infighting, Italy struggles with policy inconsistency. Long-term projects, whether in infrastructure, education, or economic development, are often delayed or abandoned when a new government takes power. Laws and reforms are frequently revised or reversed, creating confusion among businesses and citizens. For instance, labor market reforms, tax policies, and pension systems have been changed multiple times over the past few decades, making it difficult for businesses to plan for the future. The bureaucracy is also notoriously slow and inefficient, with overlapping government agencies and excessive red tape hindering economic progress. Moreover, Italy's political instability affects its standing in the European Union. While Italy is a founding member of the EU, its unstable leadership often makes it difficult to negotiate effectively on the European stage. Other EU nations sometimes view Italy as an unreliable partner, further weakening its influence in international affairs. Public distrust and growing discontent. The continuous political turmoil has led to widespread public distrust in the government. Many Italians feel that their politicians are more focused on power struggles than on addressing the country's pressing issues, such as unemployment, economic inequality, and infrastructure decay. This discontent has fueled the rise of anti-establishment and populist movements. Parties like the Five Star Movement and the far-right Brothers of Italy have gained significant support by promising to challenge the status quo and bring about real change. However, once in power, these parties have also struggled to maintain stability, often contributing to further political chaos. Italy's unstable political system is not just a matter of government turnover, it affects every aspect of life, from economic growth to social cohesion. It remains one of the biggest obstacles preventing Italy from fully realizing its potential as a leading European power. Italy is often thought of as a single nation, but in reality, it is a collection of regions with distinct histories, cultures, and identities. The strong regionalism that exists in Italy today is a legacy of the country's fragmented past, when the peninsula was divided into independent city-states, kingdoms, and republics. Even after unification in 1861, these regional differences remained deeply ingrained, preventing the development of a truly unified national identity. This has fueled ongoing separatist movements, regional political struggles, and economic disparities that continue to divide the country. Historical roots of regionalism. For most of its history, the Italian peninsula was not a single political entity. Before unification, it consisted of powerful and independent states such as the Kingdom of Sicily, the Kingdom of Naples, the Papal States, the Republic of Venice, the Duchy of Milan, and the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. These states had their own governments, laws, and even languages or dialects that varied widely from region to region. During the medieval and Renaissance periods, cities like Venice, Florence, and Genoa became major centers of commerce and culture, but they remained politically separate. The rulers of these regions often competed for power, forming alliances with foreign nations and waging wars against each other. The long history of regional independence meant that when Italy was finally unified under the Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia in 1861, it was more of a political merger than a true national unification. Unlike countries such as France, where a strong central government worked to create a national identity, Italy remained divided, with many citizens identifying more strongly with their hometown or region than with the nation as a whole. This regionalism persists today and is one of the biggest barriers to true national unity. The North-South divide and regional tensions. One of the most significant regional divisions in Italy is between the industrialized North and the economically weaker South. This divide, which has deep historical roots, continues to shape Italy's politics and economy. Northern regions such as Lombardy, Veneto, and Emilia-Romagna are wealthy, industrialized, and closely integrated into European markets. These areas contribute a significant portion of Italy's GDP and have a high standard of living. In contrast, the southern regions, often referred to as the Mezzogiorno, struggle with high unemployment, corruption, and underdeveloped infrastructure. This economic gap has fueled resentment on both sides. Many Northerners believe that they are unfairly forced to subsidize the poorer South through taxes, while Southerners argue that they have been neglected by the national government and left without opportunities for growth. The economic divide has also led to political tensions, with northern regions demanding greater autonomy or even independence from the rest of the country. This has given rise to regionalist and separatist movements that challenge Italy's national unity. Lega Nord and the push for northern independence. One of the most influential regionalist movements in modern Italy is Lega Nord, Northern League, a political party founded in the 1980s that originally sought independence for northern Italy. The party's leader, Umberto Bossi, famously referred to the South as a burden on the country and advocated for the creation of a separate state called Padania, which would include the wealthiest northern regions. Lega Nord gained significant support by promoting policies that favored northern interests, such as reducing financial aid to the South and granting more autonomy to regional governments. While the party later shifted its focus to nationalist and anti-immigration policies, the sentiment of northern separatism still exists, with many in Lombardy and Veneto supporting greater regional control over taxation and governance. In recent years, northern regions have held referendums demanding greater autonomy from the central government. While these votes have not led to full independence, they highlight the ongoing dissatisfaction with the centralized Italian state and the desire for greater self-rule. Southern separatism and the Sicilian autonomy movement. While much of the discussion around separatism in Italy focuses on the north, the south has also had its share of regionalist movements. Sicily, Italy's largest island, has a long history of seeking autonomy. After World War II, Sicily was granted special autonomous status, allowing it to govern many of its own affairs. However, some Sicilians have continued to push for full independence, arguing that the island has been economically exploited by the national government. Other regions, such as Sardinia, have also experienced independence movements. Sardinian nationalists argue that the island's unique language and culture set it apart from the rest of Italy, and some groups have called for complete secession from the country. These separatist sentiments, while not as strong as those in northern Italy, reflect the broader issue of regional identity and dissatisfaction with central governance. Cultural and linguistic divisions. Italy is often thought of as a linguistically unified country, but in reality, there are significant differences in dialects and regional languages. While Standard Italian is the official language, many Italians speak regional dialects that can be almost unintelligible to people from other parts of the country. For example, Neapolitan, Sicilian, Venetian, and Sardinian are considered distinct languages rather than mere dialects. In some cases, local languages have been actively suppressed in favor of Italian, leading to cultural tensions. Efforts to preserve regional languages and traditions have fueled identity-based movements that further reinforce Italy's regional divisions. In addition to language, cultural differences between regions are striking. Northern Italy has strong economic and cultural ties to neighboring countries such as France, Switzerland, and Austria, leading to a more European-oriented identity. Southern Italy, on the other hand, has a stronger Mediterranean influence, with cultural traditions that reflect centuries of Greek, Arab, and Spanish rule. These differences contribute to regional rivalries and the feeling that Italy is not a truly unified nation. Impact on national politics. The deep-rooted regionalism in Italy has a significant impact on national politics. Political parties often cater to regional interests rather than promoting a unified national agenda. Elections frequently highlight the stark divide between northern and southern voting patterns, with right-wing and populist parties performing well in the north, while the south tends to support left-wing or anti-establishment movements. This fragmentation makes it difficult for any single government to implement nationwide reforms, as regional leaders and parties prioritize local concerns over national interests. The influence of regional parties and separatist movements weakens central authority and contributes to Italy's broader political instability. While Italy is unlikely to break apart completely, regionalist sentiments remain a powerful force that shapes the country's political and economic landscape. The struggle between local autonomy and national unity continues to be a defining issue in Italian politics, influencing everything from economic policy to governance. The influence of organized crime is one of the most significant factors contributing to Italy's divisions, particularly in the economic and political spheres. The presence of powerful criminal organizations, such as the Mafia in Sicily, the 'Ndrangheta in Calabria, the Camorra in Naples, and the Sacra Corona Unita in Puglia, has created deep-rooted problems that have hindered economic development, weakened governance, and reinforced regional disparities. These groups operate like parallel states, controlling vast portions of the economy, infiltrating politics, and instilling fear in local populations. Historical origins of the Mafia. Organized crime in Italy has deep historical roots, particularly in the south, where weak central authority and widespread poverty allowed criminal networks to flourish. The Mafia, originally known as the Cosa Nostra, emerged in the 19th century in Sicily as a secret society that initially provided protection and arbitration in the absence of a strong legal system. However, as the Italian state struggled to assert control over the newly unified nation, the Mafia took advantage of the instability, expanding its influence into business, politics, and law enforcement. Similarly, other criminal organizations, such as the 'Ndrangheta in Calabria and the Camorra in Naples, developed their own networks of power. These groups exploited the economic underdevelopment of the South, offering jobs and financial assistance to locals while engaging in illegal activities such as extortion, drug trafficking, money laundering, and smuggling. Over time, they became deeply entrenched in society, making it difficult for the government to eradicate them. Economic impact of organized crime. One of the most damaging effects of organized crime is its impact on the economy, particularly in the South. The Mafia and other criminal groups exert significant control over businesses, often demanding piso, protection money, from local entrepreneurs. Those who refuse to pay face threats, arson attacks, or even murder. This system of extortion discourages investment and entrepreneurship, as business owners operate in constant fear of retribution. Moreover, organized crime syndicates often control large portions of the construction, waste management, and transportation industries. Public contracts meant for infrastructure projects frequently end up in the hands of mafia-controlled companies, leading to overpriced, low-quality projects that do little to improve the region's economy. Roads, bridges, and buildings constructed under mafia influence are often structurally weak due to the use of substandard materials, creating safety hazards for the public. The influence of organized crime also drives away legitimate investors. Foreign companies and businesses from northern Italy are often hesitant to invest in the South due to concerns about corruption, bribery, and the difficulty of operating in an environment where criminal organizations hold significant power. As a result, the South remains economically stagnant, further deepening the divide between northern and southern Italy. Political corruption and mafia infiltration. The mafia's influence extends far beyond the economy. It has also deeply infiltrated the political system. Many local politicians, particularly in the South, have been linked to organized crime, either through direct collaboration or through intimidation and bribery. Criminal organizations have historically used their power to influence elections, ensuring that candidates favorable to their interests gain office. For decades, politicians at both the local and national levels have been accused of colluding with the mafia. One of the most infamous examples was the Tangentopoli, Bribesville, scandal of the early 1990s, which revealed widespread corruption in the Italian government. The Mani Pulite, clean hands, investigation exposed how organized crime, businesses, and politicians were engaged in a massive system of bribery and fraud. While this led to the collapse of Italy's major political parties and the prosecution of numerous officials, the underlying problem of mafia influence persisted. Even today, criminal organizations continue to exert control over local governments, often determining how public funds are allocated and ensuring that mafia-affiliated businesses receive government contracts. This corruption undermines democracy, as voters are often forced to choose between candidates who are either directly linked to organized crime or who lack the power to challenge it. Drug trafficking and international expansion. While the mafia originally operated within Italy, it has since expanded into global criminal enterprises, particularly in drug trafficking. The 'Ndrangheta, based in Calabria, has become one of the most powerful and wealthiest criminal organizations in the world due to its dominance in the international cocaine trade. It controls major smuggling routes between South America and Europe, laundering billions of euros through legitimate businesses. The Camorra, based in Naples, has also established international operations, engaging in drug trafficking, counterfeiting, and arms smuggling. Unlike the more structured mafia, the Camorra operates through a network of loosely connected clans that frequently engage in violent turf wars, leading to high crime rates in cities like Naples. As these criminal organizations expand their operations globally, they continue to send money back to Italy, further entrenching their power and influence in the country. The profits from drug trafficking allow them to finance more corruption, buy political influence, and maintain their grip on the regions they control. Violence and fear in society. The presence of organized crime in Italy has also led to widespread violence, particularly in areas controlled by rival criminal factions. Mafia-related killings, bombings, and assassinations were particularly common in the 1980s and 1990s, when high-profile judges and anti-mafia prosecutors attempted to crack down on organized crime. One of the most notable examples of this violence was the assassination of judges Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino in 1992. These two magistrates were leading the fight against the Sicilian Mafia and had successfully prosecuted hundreds of Mafia members in the Maxi trial of the late 1980s. Their murders shocked the nation and led to a renewed effort to combat organized crime, but the Mafia's influence has proven difficult to eradicate. Even today, Mafia-related violence continues in certain regions, particularly in Naples, where the Camorra frequently engages in bloody feuds over control of drug markets and extortion rackets. The presence of these criminal organizations has created a climate of fear, where residents are often too afraid to speak out against the Mafia or cooperate with law enforcement. Challenges in fighting organized crime. While Italy has made significant efforts to combat the influence of organized crime, the challenge remains enormous. The Italian government has implemented strict anti-mafia laws, including laws that allow authorities to seize the assets of criminal organizations and use them for public purposes. Many mafia leaders have been arrested, and high-profile trials have led to the conviction of key figures. However, organized crime has proven to be highly adaptable. Whenever law enforcement cracks down on one area, criminal organizations find new ways to operate, often infiltrating legitimate businesses and political structures. In some cases, they have even disguised themselves as respectable entrepreneurs, making it difficult to distinguish between legal and illegal activities. The fight against the Mafia is also complicated by corruption within the police and judiciary. In many cases, Mafia informants within law enforcement agencies have leaked sensitive information, allowing criminal organizations to evade capture. Witness protection programs have helped some individuals testify against the Mafia, but fear of retaliation remains a major obstacle. The long-term impact of organized crime on Italy's unity. The presence of organized crime has contributed significantly to Italy's divisions, particularly between the North and the South. While the North has largely been able to keep Mafia influence at bay, the South remains heavily affected by criminal organizations. This reinforces negative stereotypes about the South and fuels resentment among Northerners, who often view the region as a drain on the national economy. At the same time, the South's struggle with organized crime makes it difficult to attract investment and develop its economy, trapping it in a cycle of poverty and dependence on government assistance. This dynamic deepens the divisions between regions, making it harder for Italy to function as a truly unified country. Organized crime is not just a law enforcement issue. It is a structural problem that affects politics, economics, and society at every level. The Mafia's grip on the country remains one of the biggest challenges preventing Italy from achieving true national cohesion and stability. One of the most defining and persistent divisions in Italy is the stark economic disparity between the wealthy, industrialized North and the impoverished, underdeveloped South. This North-South divide, often referred to as the question meridionale, Southern question, has existed since Italy's unification in 1861 and continues to shape the country's politics, society, and economic structure today. While northern Italy boasts some of Europe's most prosperous and productive regions, southern Italy remains plagued by high unemployment, low wages, organized crime, and limited economic opportunities. Historical origins of the North-South divide. The economic gap between northern and southern Italy is deeply rooted in history. Before Italian unification, the North and South developed under very different political and economic conditions. The North was home to independent city-states and powerful republics like Venice, Milan, and Florence, which were centers of trade, finance, and industry. These regions had strong economies based on commerce, banking, and skilled labor, and they developed early forms of capitalism. The South, on the other hand, was largely rural and ruled by foreign monarchs, such as the Spanish and Bourbon dynasties, who imposed feudal systems that kept the population poor and reliant on agriculture. The South remained economically stagnant, with a lack of industrialization, weak institutions, and widespread poverty. When Italy was unified in 1861 under the Kingdom of Piedmont-Sardinia, the new government prioritized the North's economic model and largely ignored the South's economic struggles. Instead of investing in the South's infrastructure and industry, the government focused on industrializing northern cities like Turin, Milan, and Genoa. This imbalance laid the foundation for the severe economic disparities that persist today. Industrialization and economic growth in the North. Throughout the late 19th and 20th centuries, northern Italy became one of the most industrialized regions in Europe. Major cities such as Milan, Turin, and Bologna became hubs of manufacturing, finance, and technological innovation. The north benefited from early industrialization. Large-scale factories and industries emerged, producing textiles, automobiles, machinery, and chemicals. Strategic geographic location. The north is closer to other European markets, France, Germany, and Switzerland, making it easier to engage in international trade. Access to skilled labor and capital. Northern Italy attracted investment and developed a highly educated workforce. Efficient infrastructure. Modern transportation networks, highways, and railway systems helped industries grow. By the mid-20th century, northern Italy became an economic powerhouse, home to multinational companies like Fiat, Pirelli, and Ferrero, and it remains one of the wealthiest regions in Europe today. Underdevelopment and economic struggles in the south. In contrast, the south, also known as the Mezzogiorno, has remained economically weak, with chronic underdevelopment, high unemployment, and widespread poverty. Several factors have contributed to the South's struggles. Late industrialization. While the North industrialized rapidly, the South remained dependent on agriculture and small-scale farming, leading to economic stagnation. High unemployment and low wages. Job opportunities in the South are scarce, leading many young people to migrate to the north or abroad in search of better prospects. Youth unemployment in the South is among the highest in Europe, sometimes exceeding 40% in some areas. Lack of infrastructure, poor transportation networks, underdeveloped public services, and inadequate investment in education and healthcare have hindered economic growth. Reliance on government subsidies. The South has historically depended on state assistance and EU funds, but these have often been mismanaged or wasted due to corruption and inefficiency. Mafia influence. Organized crime groups, such as the Camorra in Naples and the 'Ndrangheta in Calabria, have stifled business development by extorting local entrepreneurs, discouraging investment, and diverting public funds for illegal activities. Despite numerous government programs aimed at improving the South's economy, the region remains significantly behind the North in almost every economic metric, including GDP per capita, employment rates, and business growth. The economic gap in numbers. The economic disparity between North and South Italy is starkly visible in statistics. GDP per capita. The northern region of Lombardy has a GDP per capita of over 40,000 euros, while some southern regions like Calabria and Sicily have a GDP per capita of less than 20,000 euros, less than half of Lombardy's. Unemployment rate. While the north enjoys relatively low unemployment, around 5 to 7%, the south struggles with unemployment rates of 15 to 20%, with youth unemployment even higher. Investment and business growth. The majority of Italy's businesses and foreign investments are concentrated in the north. Southern businesses often struggle due to a lack of financial resources and high operational costs. Public infrastructure. The north has modern highways, high-speed rail, and advanced public services, while the south lags behind in infrastructure development, with many rural areas still lacking basic services. These economic disparities reinforce regional resentment, with many Southerners feeling abandoned by the central government, while many Northerners believe their taxes are unfairly used to subsidize the South without seeing real improvements. Migration and brain drain. The economic divide has led to a massive internal migration from the South to the North. Since the late 19th century, millions of Southerners have moved to northern cities in search of jobs and better living conditions. This migration has created overcrowded northern cities. Cities like Milan and Turin have experienced housing shortages and increased pressure on public services due to high migration levels. Brain drain in the South. Many talented and educated young people from the South leave their home regions for better opportunities in the North or abroad, further weakening the Southern economy. Social tensions. Northern Italians sometimes view Southerners as a burden on their economy, while Southerners often feel discriminated against and excluded from national development. Government efforts to bridge the gap. Over the years, successive Italian governments have tried to reduce the North-South divide through various economic programs, such as The Casa per il Mezzogiorno, 1950s to 1980s, a major public investment program that aimed to industrialize the South by funding infrastructure projects and creating jobs. However, much of the money was lost to corruption and mafia influence. European Union funding. Italy has received billions of euros from the EU's regional development programs aimed at improving infrastructure, education, and business opportunities in the South. Tax incentives for southern businesses. Various tax breaks and financial incentives have been introduced to encourage investment in the South. Despite these efforts, progress has been slow, and the South continues to lag behind. Many critics argue that inefficiency, corruption, and poor governance have prevented these initiatives from achieving meaningful results. Impact on Italy's political landscape. The economic divide between North and South has deeply influenced Italian politics. The North tends to support right-wing and business-friendly parties, while the South often votes for left-wing or populist parties that promise government assistance. This division has led to the rise of regionalist movements. Northern political parties, such as Lega Nord, have advocated for greater autonomy and even independence for the North, arguing that they should not have to financially support the poorer South. Political instability. Governments struggle to implement national economic policies that satisfy both regions, leading to frequent political crises and policy reversals. Increased resentment and division. The economic gap fuels mutual distrust, with many Northerners seeing the South as a burden, while Southerners feel abandoned by the state. The North-South divide remains one of the most persistent and challenging problems in Italy. While the country is technically unified, these economic disparities have created two very different Italys, making true national cohesion difficult to achieve. Political instability has been a defining characteristic of Italy since its unification in 1861. Over the decades, frequent government collapses, corruption scandals, bureaucratic inefficiency, and deep ideological divisions have made it difficult for Italy to achieve long-term stability and national unity. This chronic instability has not only weakened Italy's governance, but has also contributed significantly to the country's regional divisions, economic struggles, and societal frustration. Italy's history of political instability. Since the establishment of the Italian Republic in 1946, Italy has experienced an extraordinarily high turnover of governments. In less than 80 years, Italy has had over 70 governments, averaging one new government approximately every 13 months. This instability has made it difficult to implement long-term policies, as each government tends to prioritize its own short-term political survival over long-term national interests. Several key factors contribute to Italy's unstable political system. Fragmented political parties. Italian politics has long been divided among numerous parties, often forming fragile coalition governments that struggle to remain in power. Frequent elections and government collapses. Coalition governments often fall apart due to ideological differences or personal rivalries, leading to new elections and political uncertainty. Strong regional political divides. The North and South often support different political parties, making it difficult to form a government that appeals to both regions. Widespread corruption and scandals. Political corruption has eroded public trust in the government, leading to frequent resignations and scandals. The weakness of Italy's coalition governments. Unlike many other European countries that have stable majority governments, Italy's parliamentary system is notorious for producing weak coalition governments that depend on multiple parties to remain in power. Since no single party usually wins enough seats to govern alone, parties must form alliances, often with groups that have conflicting political ideologies. These coalitions are highly unstable because policy disagreements lead to infighting and gridlock. Small parties within the coalition often threaten to withdraw support unless their demands are met. Prime ministers frequently resign or are forced out due to coalition breakdowns. For example, Italy's longest-serving post-war prime minister, Silvio Berlusconi, led multiple governments but faced repeated collapses due to legal troubles, coalition conflicts, and corruption allegations. Similarly, recent governments have struggled to stay in power for more than a couple of years before internal disputes force new elections. Bureaucratic inefficiency and overregulation. Italy's government is also plagued by a notoriously slow, inefficient, and bureaucratic system. The country has one of the most complex and over-regulated administrative systems in Europe, which hampers economic growth, delays public projects, and frustrates both businesses and ordinary citizens. Some major issues include excessive red tape. Businesses and individuals must navigate a maze of permits, approvals, and regulations to complete even simple tasks. Slow legal system. Court cases can take years or even decades to reach a final ruling, discouraging investment and leaving many disputes unresolved. Poor public services. Despite high taxes, public services such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure often suffer from inefficiency and underfunding, particularly in the South. Corruption and nepotism. Government jobs and contracts are often awarded based on political connections rather than merit, leading to mismanagement and waste. This inefficiency is particularly damaging in times of crisis. For example, after natural disasters like earthquakes, Italy's slow and chaotic bureaucracy has delayed reconstruction efforts, leaving many affected communities struggling for years. Political corruption and scandals. Corruption has been a major issue in Italian politics, with politicians frequently accused of bribery, embezzlement, and ties to organized crime. Some of the biggest corruption scandals in Italy's history include the Tangentopoli scandal, 1992 to 1990, for a massive corruption investigation, also known as Mani Pulite, clean hands, uncovered widespread bribery involving politicians, businesses, and public officials. This scandal led to the collapse of Italy's major political parties and the arrest of hundreds of politicians. Silvio Berlusconi's legal troubles. The former prime minister, one of Italy's most influential figures, was involved in multiple corruption cases, tax fraud, and bribery scandals throughout his career. Mafia infiltration of politics. Many politicians, particularly in the South, have been accused of collaborating with the Mafia to secure votes and government contracts. These scandals have deeply eroded public trust in Italy's political system, making many Italians cynical about their leaders and institutions. As a result, voter turnout has declined and populist parties have gained popularity by promising to fight corruption and challenge the political establishment. The rise of populism and political extremes. In recent decades, populist and extremist parties have gained significant support, reflecting public frustration with Italy's unstable and corrupt political system. Parties such as the Five Star Movement, M5S, a populist party that emerged as an anti-establishment force, criticizing traditional politicians and promising direct democracy and government reform. Lega Nord, Northern League, a right-wing party that originally advocated for the separation of northern Italy from the south, arguing that the north was economically burdened by the poorer regions. Fratelli d'Italia, Brothers of Italy, a nationalist and conservative party that has gained popularity by promoting traditional values, strict immigration policies, and national sovereignty. These parties have further complicated Italy's political landscape, as they often reject traditional coalition-building efforts, making it even harder to form stable governments. The rise of political polarization has also deepened Italy's regional and ideological divides, with the north tending to support pro-business, conservative parties, and the south leaning toward populist and left-wing movements. European Union relations and economic challenges. Italy's political instability has also weakened its position within the European Union (EU). As one of the founding members of the EU, Italy has benefited from economic support and trade agreements, but its frequent government crises have made it difficult to maintain strong leadership in European affairs. Some major issues include high national debt. Italy has one of the highest public debts in Europe, over 140% of GDP, leading to frequent tensions with the EU over financial policies and budget constraints. Clashes over economic policy. Some Italian governments have resisted EU-imposed austerity measures, arguing that they harm Italy's struggling economy. Debates over immigration. Italy, as a key entry point for migrants arriving from North Africa, has frequently clashed with the EU over refugee policies and burden sharing among member states. Due to its unstable governments and frequent policy shifts, Italy has struggled to present a unified and consistent strategy within the EU, often finding itself at odds with both Brussels and its European partners. Impact of political instability on national unity. Italy's political instability has exacerbated the country's deep regional divides. The south often feels neglected by Rome, while the north resents having to financially support the rest of the country. This has fueled separatist movements and calls for greater regional autonomy. Northern Italy, especially regions like Lombardy and Veneto, has pushed for more economic and political independence, arguing that it should not have to subsidize the poorer south. Southern Italy, in contrast, feels abandoned by the central government and demands more state investment and job creation programs. The inability of Italian governments to effectively address these regional grievances has kept the country deeply divided. Instead of implementing long-term reforms to bridge these gaps, many governments focus on short-term electoral gains, further reinforcing instability. Italy's ongoing political crises, combined with corruption, inefficiency, and ideological divisions, continue to prevent the country from achieving national unity and economic stability. The constant cycle of government collapses, failed reforms, and public distrust in institutions ensures that political instability remains one of the biggest obstacles to Italy's progress. One of the most deeply entrenched and divisive forces in Italy is the Mafia and organized crime, which has played a significant role in shaping the country's economy, politics, and social fabric. While the Mafia's influence is strongest in the southern regions, its effects extend across the entire country, contributing to regional disparities, economic stagnation, and political corruption. The presence of powerful criminal organizations has hindered Italy's progress, discouraged investment, and further deepened the divisions between the north and the south. The origins and expansion of the Mafia. The Mafia's roots can be traced back to the 19th century in southern Italy, particularly in Sicily, Calabria, and Campania. Originally, these criminal organizations operated as informal groups that protected landowners and businesses in exchange for payments. Over time, they evolved into powerful criminal empires, expanding their influence into politics, law enforcement, and international crime networks. Today, the most notorious Italian organized crime groups include Cosa Nostra, Sicily, the original Sicilian mafia, known for its hierarchical structure and brutal enforcement tactics. 'Ndrangheta, Calabria, one of the most powerful crime syndicates specializing in drug trafficking, money laundering, and extortion. Camorra, Naples, and Campania, a network of crime families involved in counterfeit goods, arms smuggling, and illicit businesses. Sacra Corona Unita, Apulia, a lesser-known but still dangerous organization with ties to international smuggling operations. These organizations have deeply infiltrated Italian society, making it difficult for the government to eliminate their influence. They have controlled businesses, government contracts, elections, and even parts of law enforcement, making them a persistent and destabilizing force. The Mafia's economic impact on Italy. The Mafia's hold over southern Italy has crippled economic development by creating an environment of fear, corruption, and inefficiency. Organized crime has hindered entrepreneurship, foreign investment, and infrastructure projects, contributing to the economic disparity between North and South. Some of the major economic consequences of the Mafia's influence include extortion and protection rackets. Pizzo businesses, especially in the South, are forced to pay protection money to the Mafia in order to operate. Those who refuse often face violence, arson, or even murder. This discourages economic growth and innovation, as businesses cannot operate freely. Infiltration of public contracts. The Mafia has a strong presence in government contracts and public infrastructure projects. By securing contracts through bribery and intimidation, they siphon off public funds, leading to unfinished or poor-quality construction projects. Money laundering and tax evasion. The Mafia controls vast amounts of illegal wealth, which they launder through fake businesses, real estate, and financial institutions. This results in massive tax losses for the government, reducing funds available for public services. Obstruction of foreign investment. International businesses are often hesitant to invest in southern Italy due to the high risk of Mafia interference. This prevents economic development and job creation in regions that need it the most. According to estimates, the Mafia's activities cost Italy tens of billions of euros annually, with an estimated 7% of the country's GDP being controlled by organized crime. This creates an enormous economic burden, particularly for the South, which already struggles with unemployment and poverty. The Mafia's influence on politics and corruption. The Mafia's reach extends far beyond the economy. It has deeply infiltrated Italian politics, making it difficult to implement reforms and fight corruption. Many politicians, particularly in the South, have been accused of collaborating with the Mafia in exchange for votes, protection, and financial support. Some key ways the Mafia has influenced politics include election manipulation. The Mafia has a history of rigging elections, bribing politicians, and intimidating voters to ensure that their preferred candidates win. This allows them to maintain power over local and national governments. Corrupt politicians. Many politicians, even at the highest levels, have been exposed for having ties to organized crime. In some cases, government officials have accepted bribes or turned a blind eye to Mafia activities in exchange for personal gain. Obstruction of anti-Mafia efforts. Whenever the Italian government has attempted to crack down on organized crime, the Mafia has used threats, assassinations, and bribery to weaken law enforcement efforts. Some judges, prosecutors, and journalists who have fought against the Mafia have been killed or forced into hiding. One of the most infamous assassinations was that of Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, two anti-Mafia judges who were murdered in 1992 for leading efforts against organized crime. Their deaths shocked the nation and highlighted the Mafia's deadly grip on Italy's justice system. Despite periodic crackdowns, the Mafia continues to adapt and evolve, finding new ways to infiltrate politics and evade justice. This persistent corruption has weakened trust in the government and law enforcement, further deepening Italy's divisions. Regional divide. The North-South Mafia contrast. The impact of the Mafia is felt most strongly in the South, where criminal organizations hold the most power. However, their influence has also spread to the North, particularly in money laundering, white-collar crime, and drug trafficking. The difference between the North and the South regarding the Mafia can be summarized as follows. Southern Italy. Mafia groups operate openly, controlling businesses, politicians, and entire communities. People often live in fear, and businesses must comply with Mafia demands to survive. Law enforcement struggles to maintain control, and corruption runs deep within local governments. Northern Italy. While not as visibly controlled by the Mafia, northern cities like Milan and Turin have become financial hubs for Mafia operations, where illegal money is laundered through real estate, banking, and corporate investments. The Mafia remains less violent in the north, but still operates behind the scenes. The economic prosperity of the north has allowed it to resist Mafia control more effectively, while the south's poverty, unemployment, and lack of opportunities have made it more vulnerable to organized crime. As a result, the north-south divide has been reinforced, with the Mafia playing a significant role in maintaining the South's economic struggles. The government's fight against the Mafia. Over the years, the Italian government has made several efforts to combat the Mafia, with varying degrees of success. Some of the most notable anti-Mafia measures include: immigration has become one of the most divisive issues in modern Italy, fueling political conflicts, social tensions, and deepening the divide between different regions of the country. As a key entry point into Europe for migrants and refugees from Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, Italy has struggled to manage large waves of immigration, particularly in recent decades. This has led to economic strains, political polarization, and cultural clashes, further fragmenting an already divided nation. Italy's geographical role in the immigration crisis. Italy's location in the central Mediterranean makes it one of the primary gateways for migrants and refugees trying to reach Europe. The country's long coastline and proximity to North Africa, particularly Libya and Tunisia, have made it a major landing point for people fleeing war, poverty, and political instability. The journey across the Mediterranean is often dangerous and deadly, with thousands of migrants losing their lives each year attempting to cross in overcrowded, unseaworthy boats. Despite this, many continue to make the journey, hoping to find safety and economic opportunities in Europe. Italian islands like Lampedusa and Sicily have become major entry points, where overwhelmed rescue teams and refugee camps struggle to cope with the constant influx of people. Since the 2011 Arab Spring and the Libyan Civil War, Italy has seen a dramatic increase in the number of arrivals, sometimes exceeding hundreds of thousands per year. This has put immense pressure on Italy's government and social systems, leading to public backlash and political instability. The economic and social impact of immigration. The arrival of large numbers of migrants has had both positive and negative effects on Italy's economy and society. Positive contributions of immigrants. Filling labor gaps. Italy's population is aging rapidly, and immigrants play a crucial role in industries like agriculture, construction, domestic work, and healthcare. Many jobs that Italians are unwilling to do are taken by migrants, keeping parts of the economy running. Demographic support. With Italy's birth rate at a historic low, immigrants provide a much-needed boost to the workforce, helping to sustain pension systems and social services. Cultural diversity. Immigration has enriched Italy's cultural landscape, introducing new cuisines, traditions, and perspectives, particularly in large cities like Milan, Rome, and Naples. Challenges and tensions. Despite these benefits, immigration has also led to significant social and economic challenges, contributing to Italy's divisions. Strain on public services. Many migrants arrive in Italy without documentation or financial resources, placing heavy demands on housing, healthcare, and social welfare programs. This has led to complaints that local Italians, particularly in poorer regions, are being neglected in favor of new arrivals. Unemployment and competition. In economically weaker areas, particularly in southern Italy, some locals feel that migrants are taking jobs and lowering wages by accepting lower pay and harsher working conditions. This has fueled resentment, particularly among working-class Italians. Overcrowding and crime perception. In some cities, migrant communities have formed high-density neighborhoods where poverty, unemployment, and social isolation are common. This has contributed to perceptions of increased crime, even though statistical evidence shows that immigrants are not significantly more likely to commit crimes than native Italians. The political backlash against immigration. Immigration has become a highly politicized issue, with parties on both the left and right using it to mobilize support. Right-wing populist response. Parties like Lega Nord, Northern League, and Fratelli d'Italia, Brothers of Italy, have built their platforms on anti-immigration rhetoric, arguing that Italy is being overwhelmed by foreigners. They have pushed for tighter border controls, mass deportations, and reduced social benefits for migrants. Left-wing and humanitarian stance. On the other side, left-wing parties and humanitarian organizations argue for compassionate policies, advocating for the rights of refugees and calling for European cooperation to share the burden of resettlement. Frustration with the European Union. Many Italians feel abandoned by the EU, believing that Italy is unfairly left to handle the migration crisis alone while other European nations refuse to accept their share of refugees. This has led to anti-EU sentiment, particularly among nationalist parties. The issue of immigration has become a major factor in elections, with debates over whether to tighten border security, deport undocumented migrants, or integrate them into Italian society. These political conflicts have further divided Italy along regional, ideological, and class lines. The North-South divide on immigration. One of the most noticeable aspects of the immigration crisis is how differently it is perceived in northern and southern Italy. Southern Italy, high immigration burden regions like Sicily, Calabria, and Apulia receive the largest number of migrants due to their proximity to North Africa. These regions are also among Italy's poorest, struggling with high unemployment and economic stagnation. Many locals feel that the influx of migrants further strains public resources and job opportunities, leading to resentment and unrest. Northern Italy, stronger opposition to immigration despite receiving fewer migrants than the south. Northern regions like Lombardy and Veneto have some of the strongest anti-immigration movements. The north, being more economically developed, has a larger middle-class population that fears cultural change and increased competition for jobs. Right-wing parties like Lega Nord have their strongest support base in the north, campaigning on promises to limit immigration and prioritize Italians. This division has created a paradox. While the south bears the greatest economic burden of immigration, the north expresses greater political opposition to it. Cultural clashes and identity crisis. Beyond the economic and political aspects, immigration has also challenged Italian national identity, leading to cultural clashes and social tensions.